Great. Thank you, Stephanie. Good evening, everybody, and welcome, and thank you for attending. My name is Momin Rahman. I'm the chair of sociology at the moment for another month or so. I want to welcome you all to this panel. I'm going to hand over to our moderator in just a minute or two. I'm just going to do some housekeeping first. You should be muted once you entered the room, and please keep yourself muted unless you're asking a question at the end, and that just cuts down on kind of noise and interference for us. I guess most of us are used to this by now after a year and a half, but it also has gotten a bit tiring managing Zoom, I think, so it's always useful to have these reminders. On behalf of the department and the university, I also want to do a couple of acknowledgements. We are located here. Trent in Peterborough and Durham is located on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississauga and Anishinaabe, which is made up of Curve Lake First Nation, Alderville First Nation, Hiawatha First Nation, and the Mississauga of Scugog Island First Nations. Our land acknowledgement is something we do at almost every event at Trent, and I hope that it gives us some pause to think about the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism for our Indigenous peoples in this land, and that it isn't just a perfunctory acknowledgement that we make, and we think about how we can contribute to the kind of reconciliation process that has been undergoing for a while now within Canada. On top of the land acknowledgement, and given that this is a panel about, at some level, about labor and whether we get paid for labor, we also want to acknowledge the labor of people in North America. We acknowledge here that much of what we know of Canada, including its culture, economic growth and development throughout history and across time, has been made possible by the labor of enslaved Africans and their descendants, who suffered the oppressions of transatlantic trafficking of their people and the oppressions of chattel slavery. We're indebted to their labor and their sacrifice, and we also acknowledge the tremors of violence that continue through the generations to this day. So, to our topic. We're really happy that Professor Rappaport has organized this panel. We're really happy to have the speakers here. We are seeing in our program in sociology that this idea of universal basic income has become a really important idea in the public realm, and it's an important social policy discourse as well that cuts across many different disciplines and concerns, and particularly, I think during the pandemic, it has raised in its kind of visibility because we've had many governments effectively providing income on a large scale for people during periods where they couldn't work. So this is a really interesting topic. It's a really important topic, and I think one that we will continue to engage with over the coming years. So I'm very pleased to have this panel. I'm going to offer some thanks as well to the people that helped to organize this panel. We have a couple of people here from Otonabee, Rachel, that you've heard from already, and Stephanie, who's the principal, and they've been really supportive to the sociology program in organizing this event, and they're always supportive to our students and our events in the department. And thanks also to, in particular, to faculty who worked on this panel, particularly Perry Ballantyne and Naomi Nichols, and of course our host and moderator, David Rappaport. So I'm going to pass you over now to David, who'll introduce our speakers and discuss the topic in more detail.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Momin. Thank you for that. Thank you, and I also want to thank the audience who came tonight to attend this event. Universal Basic Income, of course, is a very important public policy initiative and discussion. We have a really fine panel tonight. We couldn't ask for a finer panel. So let me introduce them all now, and then we'll get right into the crux of the matter. In order of their appearance, Elaine Power is a professor of health studies at Queen's University. She researches food insecurity and is an advocate for UBI at a number of levels, a number of venues. And she is the co-author of the recently published The Case for Basic Income. Our second speaker is Jim Struthers, as a professor emeritus from the Canadian Studies program at Trent University. Jim is widely published in the history of unemployment and social welfare in Canada. And Jessica Topfer, our third speaker, is a student at Trent. She is a longtime Lindsay basic income advocate. Jessica works in the not-for-profit sector as a program manager. So just a couple of nuts and bolts, and then we'll get rolling. The panelists each have 12 minutes for their presentation. I will notify you at the 10-minute mark. I'll just simply jump in and say 2 minutes to go. And then at the 11-minute mark, at that point, you should be wrapping up. The presentations are followed with the Q&A. If you have a question, please send a chat, and that'll be sent to me. And of course, you can put your hand up as well if you like at that point. So what is UBI? What happened in Ontario? What did happen in Ontario? What better way to find out with these three panelists? So, Elaine Power, Dr. Elaine Power, take it away.
Okay, thank you, David. And thank you everyone for coming. I'm going to share my screen with, I have some slides because to help me keep me organized, because some of you may know I can talk about this for a very long time. So I'd rather not do that tonight because I don't want to be too rude. So I'm going to start with a little overview of basic income. There's the cover of my co-authored book with Jamie Swift. I would like to say to start that I'm in Kingston or Cataraqui, which is the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people. And it's also part of the dish with one spoon territory. And this metaphor, well, the dish with one spoon is actually a treaty, but I love this idea of sharing, that the dish with one spoon was an agreement, is an agreement to share the territory and ensure that there's enough land and enough food for everyone. And I think that's pretty much the spirit of basic income, that we're going to look after each other and make sure that everybody has enough. A little bit about me. I've been 17 years at Queen's. For many years, I taught a course in the social determinants of health. I've been doing research on food insecurity since for a very long time. And that's led directly to my advocacy for basic income. And it's 8 years this month since I co-founded the Kingston Action Group for Basic Income Guarantee. Just to situate a little bit our discussion tonight, I want to take you way back to 1948 when the United Nations endorsed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which basically says that everyone has the right to an adequate standard of living. And Canada has signed on to this and many other international agreements that at some philosophical level, we could say we all agree that the state has an obligation to make sure to look after its citizens. So what is basic income? It's a cash transfer from government to individuals. It's universally accessible to everyone who needs it. Unlike social assistance, it's unconditional. Unlike the Canada Emergency Response Benefit or CERB, it's unconditional. You just have to be eligible by a matter of income and you get it, or as we'll talk about in a minute, if it's universal, then everyone would get it. And it's enough to meet basic needs. This is the Basic Income Canada Network definition. There are actually lots of pilots happening in the United States that don't meet the last criteria of adequate to meet basic needs. There's small kind of cash top-ups. So there's lots of different ways of organizing this. And it's known by lots of different names, including guaranteed annual income, a guaranteed livable income, basic income guarantee, a minimum annual income, or a negative income tax. And I feel a bit rude disagreeing with my hosts this evening, but in fact, I'm not going to talk about UBI in the sense of the demogrant model where everyone gets a basic income. So you could imagine that every Canadian would get $2,000 a month, and then it would get clawed back at income tax time. In fact, most of the key organizations in Canada are advocating for a more targeted approach, what's called a negative income tax, which sounds negative, of course. But the idea that if you meet an income criteria, you would receive the basic income, and it would gradually or slowly be phased out, so that someone making a good salary like me would not actually get the basic income. So you could think of it as universal in the sense that Medicare is universal, that everyone who needs it would get it. So the main arguments to support basic income is that our current social safety net is ineffective and inefficient. And we saw this with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, that our EI system was just inadequate to meet the huge number of Canadians who were out of work. Over 7 million people took advantage of that program. It's an effective anti-poverty policy. It stimulates and supports the economy, and it would pay for itself over time. The problem, of course, is that it wouldn't pay for itself over the electoral cycle. We have precedents in Canada, including the old age security and the GIS, and also the Canada Child Benefit. And as Jamie and I argued in our book, it creates the conditions for freedom, for security, and for justice. There are many pilots around the world, including 2 in Canada. We had the MINCOM experiment in Manitoba, and I think Jim is probably going to talk about that. And then the Ontario Basic Income Pilot, which started in 2017 and was unfortunately canceled by our current government. The common themes that we see in these pilots is that there's negligible effects on employment. We see better health outcomes, we see better educational attainment, we see decreased crime rates, and we see community level impacts at the, including economic and social. And I have to say, after a while, it gets a little boring. Like really all the pilots, you know, maybe the details are a little different, but this is kind of a universal, these are universal themes. It doesn't really matter whether it's a higher income or a lower income country. We have in Canada already some successful basic income programs, including the Canada Child Benefit and the Old Age Security. And basically what the basic income groups in Canada want to do is extend that kind of income floor to the single age working adult. We saw very dramatic declines in seniors poverty when the GIS and the OAS and GIS was introduced. I've heard Hugh Seagull talk many times about the Toronto Star stories in the early 1970s of senior women eating dog food because that's all they could afford. And that really created a lot of public momentum for an income floor for seniors. And I imagine this graph would be even more dramatic if you broke it out by gender, because of course women are much more likely to be poor in their old age than men. We also have seen a steep decline in child poverty with the introduction of the Canada Child Benefit. So you could think about, why is it that we don't want to extend that to working age adults? There's 2 main reasons that are given, but I would argue that one of the major ones is that are the stereotypes about low-income people, that they're lazy and that is their fault. We have our premier last month being not only poor bashing, but also racist in his remarks, but very clearly, this is the man who canceled the pilot, has very clearly has some strong and unfounded beliefs about working poor and people. So working poor, the issue is that actually most people who are poor actually have a job already, about 70% of people. So we have, there's lots of research, and as I've already said, there's really very little evidence to suggest that there would be any decrease in labor market participation. We have some good results from MinCom that also show similar results. This is also affordable. The Parliamentary Budget Office has done a couple of times, has costed this. It's just a really matter of political priorities. And the Basic Income Canada Network has also costed out 3 different options. The first is the one that I've been talking about, the negative income tax that would be targeted to 18 to 64-year-olds. The next one would include seniors. And the last one is really the universal one. If you want to go and take a look at that, I hope you would be convinced, as I have been, that option 3 is actually the upfront price tag is staggering and probably would be a really hard political sell. So I think option 1 is the one that most of us in the basic income movement are advocating at this point. There are different philosophies underlying the different kinds of models. Often the critics will kind of point to the libertarian model, kind of minimalist or austerity model. We can look at CERB as a mixed welfare model that kind of combines some degrees of our current system with basic income. And then there's the strong basic income model that would be an adequate basic income that would also include other social safety net supports like affordable housing and childcare and so on. And this is a paper from Young and Mulvale from a few years ago that if you're interested in these different philosophies underlying these different models, it's a really nice overview. So our Kingston group came up with our goals, what we think would be a good, the goals of a basic income: to increase social justice, to increase income security, increase equality of opportunity, increase dignity, and increase the number of Canadians above the poverty line. Benefits of a strong model, a basic income plus model: economic savings, reduction of bureaucracy in our social assistance system, the stigma, the government intrusion. It would stimulate the economy. We could potentially end poverty. It would help families and individuals weather the kind of income insecurity that we're seeing. It would provide a recognition of unpaid work, the kinds of work that we saw in the pandemic that are clearly very important. For opportunities for meaningful work, especially for anybody who wants to engage in the kind of work that isn't going to be paid in the marketplace. We've seen in some of the pilots that it unleashes creativity and boosts entrepreneurship. It helps provide employer and employee flexibility. It's basically potentially, if it's adequate enough, is a permanent strike fund, so that people could walk away from their unsafe, low-paid jobs. At a kind of larger level, I think it enhances democracy and people's ability to participate in our society, promotes dignity, could act as a force for social cohesion and unity. And it really opens up the space that would allow us to rethink our relationship to each other, the planet, and the future. So I'm kind of sold on it. I can also tell you about the arguments against it, but none of them have convinced me otherwise. Danielle Martin, who actually wrote the foreword to our book, maybe some of you know her. She actually wrote a book about how to improve our healthcare system, and basic income was one of the 6 recommendations that she made because it would take so much pressure off the healthcare system. And she has said, this is the 8.5% hospital admission reduction is from MinCom, from the Manitoba pilot. I just want to put in a little plug for the Ontario Basic Income Network. They've developed a very lovely, robust set of cases for basic income: health, food security, women, the arts. Work and Finance. If any of those interest you, there's very nice summaries of the evidence for basic income for each of those topics. The Basic Income Canada Youth Network is really exciting, just over a year old. Young people mobilizing in support of basic income. They're really dynamic and fun. Unfortunately, they're having an event tonight as well. We have the Stephen Del Duca, the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, saying he will reinstate the pilot. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but the good news is it's on their radar. We have just last month, the Ontario Medical Association putting in a plug for the social determinants of health, and income, as one of those determinants of health. This is, again, would take so much pressure off the healthcare system. We have very significant activity in Prince Edward Island as a potential for a demonstration project for the whole island, and a number of senators in the Canadian Senate just this month have called for federal support for that demonstration project. That's really exciting. If you think about Medicare, it started in Saskatchewan, and then it took 20 years to actually spread across the country. We're thinking PEI could be the equivalent for basic income. Unfortunately, our political leadership, well, some of them anyway, are still a little reluctant. At the top left there is Lisa MacLeod, who was the minister in charge of canceling the basic income pilot. You can see she wasn't well positioned by her media people when they put her in front of that sign that says, live in poverty. We have our premier still promoting food banks as the solution for food insecurity when we know it's an income problem, and we have the prime minister doing the same thing. That was from last year, actually. If you want to be inspired, check out this little video. It's about 1.5 minutes, and it's a delightful little video about what very inspiring, what basic income could do for people. And there is, we're going to be taking the Basic Income Now campaign, which was developed for the federal election. And I hope you'll be seeing lots of these logos across the province for the upcoming provincial election in June. And if you're looking for Christmas presents for people, my co-author asked me to put in a plug for our book. We hope it's been pretty well received, and it's meant to be readable. It features some of the stories of the basic income pilot participants, both in Lindsay and in Hamilton. And we're going to hear a little bit more about that later. So I think that's all I have. And David didn't cut me off, so maybe that means I didn't go overboard. Okay.
Messages, but that's okay. It was very interesting it was really good to hear what you were saying. Just a couple of quick things for those folks who came on a bit later. Two things. One, this is being recorded, and it's going to be posted on the Trent University Otonabee College YouTube channel, and we'll let you know about that. And secondly, a few of you are going under the name of Rachel Kochevsky. You might have noticed that. Seems to be a Zoom bug. You can change that to your real name if you like. Okay, our next speaker is Jim Struthers. Jim, I'm just going to be sending chats when the time is up. Okay.
Okay, sounds good, David. Okay. So I'm going to give you a bit of a historical background on basic income in Canada, and because I'm an historian and I've done previous books on the history of welfare in Ontario and on unemployment insurance, the origins of unemployment insurance. So I want to give a bit of historical context for what basic income means, but also some of the difficulties that it might be facing politically. And I'd like to begin my remarks this evening with a quote from the 1970 report on poverty in Canada that was chaired by Senator David Kroll, which was really the first government body to recommend the creation of a guaranteed annual income to eliminate poverty in this country. So it was a very significant report, even though in the end its recommendations were not followed. In the report, Kroll argued, quote, "The welfare system is a hopeless failure. The matter is not even controversial." That's in 1970, 4 years after the origins of the Canada Assistance Plan governing welfare. Flash forward to 1988 and Transitions, which was the name of the final report of Ontario's Social Assistance Review Committee, chaired by Justice George Thompson, which stated that welfare in Ontario lacked, quote, "any coherent set of principles and objectives." Or look at the 2016 Poverty Gap report put out by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, which revealed that for single employable adults on social assistance in Ontario, the gap between their monthly income and basic needs had risen from 20% in 1993 to almost 60% by 2015. Or the 2018 report of Ontario's Auditor General, which noted that, quote, "in each of the last 5 years, the Ontario Works program has helped only 10 to 13% of recipient cases to successfully find employment and leave the program," end of quote. What all these quotes show from various government organizations and bodies is that there's immense dissatisfaction over the past half century with Ontario's and Canada's welfare system. As John Stapleton, who was a 30-year veteran, senior civil servant in Ontario's Ministry of Community and Social Services, argued in a 2008 report for Toronto's Metcalfe Foundation, he said, quote, "welfare programs are extremely unpopular. The public has made its decision about welfare. That decision is that it will not sustain the program," end of quote. Now, 25 years ago in 1995, when Mike Harris and the Conservatives defeated Bob Rae and the NDP on the basis of their appeal for a common sense revolution to reinstate workfare or compulsory work requirements as criteria for maintaining eligibility for social assistance, I was invited to give a keynote address in December to a conference in Kitchener on the theme of getting people to work and off welfare, because I just published my book on the limits of affluence. And the title of my talk to that conference was, "Can Workfare Work? Reflections from History." My conclusion was that it could not. As I argued then, and quoting from my talk, quote, "Workfare, whenever it has emerged, represents an attempt to shift the cause of persistently high levels of unemployment away from the structural changes within the economy and towards the inner moral character or values of the victims of these changes. Simply put, workfare is about returning to the oldest distinction in social policy history between the deserving and the undeserving poor." End quote. Now, it's interesting that sitting in the audience when I was giving this talk was David Sabucci, who was Mike Harris's Minister of Community and Social Services, who had spoken immediately before me to the conference. He was the lead-off speaker at the conference. And in his talk, Sabucci said that, quote, "able-bodied people will be required to perform community service or be in training programs leading to jobs in order to earn their welfare checks. All able-bodied recipients will be required to look for work and accept any offer of work they are physically capable of doing. We can't be as selective as we used to be," Tabucci said. "Any job is a good job right now." So that was the Minister of Community and Social Services launching the initiation of workfare, the return of workfare to Canadian social policy. Tabucci also, in his speech, defended the Conservatives' 1995 decision to slash the basic rate for social assistance by 21.6%. As he told the media, welfare diets were previously far too generous. To make his point, Tabucci argued that a single able-bodied person on welfare could easily survive on a monthly food budget of $90. As proof, he gave the media his own welfare diet shopping list, which included bread, but no butter, 9 servings of pasta with no sauce, no salt or other pantry staples, as well as a dented can of tuna he had gotten on sale for 69 cents after haggling with a grocery store owner. Critics at the time pointed out that the food items in Subuchi's welfare diet contained less than half of the calories recommended by the World Health Organization. In an October 2020 phone call interview with the Toronto Star, Subuchi, now 69 years old and retired, admitted that, quote, as a rookie minister in Harris's cabinet, he was naive and unprepared. His welfare diet shopping list and his advice that welfare recipients haggle with shopkeepers over dented cans of tuna were evidence of that. Was I a good communicator at the time? No, clearly I wasn't, Subuchi said. 20 years later, after 3 successive Liberal governments in Ontario, ostensibly committed to an Ontario poverty reduction strategy, John Stapleton updated Subuchi's welfare diet. He discovered that the cost of living since 1995 in Ontario had increased by 45%, but the cost of Subuchi's sample shopping list had ballooned by 107% to $190 a month. During the same period, welfare rates for a single person on Ontario Works had increased by only 31% to $681 a month. As Stapleton said, quote, 20 years after the publication of the laughable welfare diet, Ontario's poor are dealing with a crisis in nutrition that's no laughing matter whatsoever. It's a disaster in waiting in terms of health and human costs. It also accounts for the ballooning dependency of Ontario's poor on food banks. By 2015, the average duration of dependency on food banks, which Doug Ford's very in favor of, had doubled from 12 months to an average of 24 months. So, as of 2 days ago, according to the Toronto Star and CBC News, Toronto food banks reported 1.45 million visits over the past year alone, which was a 45% increase from 2020, and 1.5 times more than the previous record set in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. New food bank clients have increased by 61% compared to the previous year, and they now outnumber existing clients for the first time. 1 in 3 clients surveyed by the Daily Bread Food Bank had to forego eating for a whole day in the past year, and for more than half of them, this happened almost every month. Food banks such as the Daily Bread can only provide people with enough food to feed their families for 3 days each week. The other 4 days must be paid for out of pocket, which the Daily Bread argued in their report is impossible on less than $10 a day. Yet the Daily Bread study showed that food bank users, after paying for their housing, now have on average only $9.17 left over to pay for food, transportation, and other basic needs per day. That's from the Toronto Star 2 days ago. On average, the users surveyed by the Daily Bread Food Bank had an adjusted income of $1,100 per month, around half of Toronto's market basket measure or Canada's official poverty line. So these are not people who are well off at all. And charity isn't working either. Workfare doesn't work, charity doesn't work, and poverty continues to grow. What does this historical context have to do with basic income? Quite simply, it shows the extent to which attempts by all 3 political parties in Ontario, the NDP under Bob Rae, which did raise welfare rates significantly between 1990 and 1995, but ended up abandoning its plans to end welfare as we know it. The Conservatives under Mike Harris and the Liberals under first David Peterson in the 1980s and subsequently Dalton McKenty and Kathleen Wynne to reform welfare in Ontario through a poverty restriction strategy in the last 10 years has been a consistent failure. Fueled as well by Liberal and Conservative federal governments, which abolished 50-50 cost sharing of provincial welfare in the early 1990s and prohibitions against work test and workfare, which were previously embedded in the Canada Assistance Plan of 1966, which was abolished by the Chrétien government in 1995, allowing the return of workfare across Canada. And also the transformation of unemployment insurance into employment insurance, which during the 2008-2009 financial crisis provided only 1/3 of the jobless with any insurance benefits, compared to 80% that UI provided to the unemployed in the 1990-1992 financial crisis. Against the backdrop of this consistent failure, the case for a new approach of universal basic income, as described by Dr. Power, appears persuasive, particularly in light of the recent policy success of the Canada Emergency Recovery Benefit, which paid those rendered jobless by the pandemic with an emergency income of $2,000 a month, more than double the rate of assistance currently provided to a single adult on Ontario Works. In other words, it's time to try a new approach to poverty reduction and deepening inequality in the new economy of increasingly precarious work. That's it.
Thank you, Jim. Just before we get on to Jessica, just a reminder, if you want to change your name from Rachel Klaczewski to your own name, feel free, of course. Secondly, this is being recorded. And thirdly, if you have any questions, please send them through the chat function. So because as soon as the last speaker is finished, we're going to be opening up a Q&A. Okay, Jessica, you're on.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. My name is Jess, and I'm here to share my community's experience and more intimately, my experience as a recipient of basic income with you. And I'm hoping that sort of I can humanize and provide anecdotes for what Elaine and Jim have already touched on. So I'm going to speak a little bit to the logistics of the Ontario Basic Income Pilot Project, share about my experience, and then I'd like to talk a little bit about the cancellation and organizing since the cancellation was announced. So in 2016, the province of Ontario announced that they'd be initiating a basic income pilot project in 3 communities across Ontario. We had Hamilton, Thunder Bay, and then my hometown, Lindsay, Ontario. The project's stated intent was to measure how basic income might improve individual and community outcomes in things like food security, stress and anxiety, mental health, health and healthcare usage, housing stability, education, employment, and labor market participation. So speaking specifically to Lindsay, of a population of around 20,000 people, 2,000 Lindsay residents were recipients of basic income during the pilot project. In order to qualify as a participant, folks had to be between 18 to 64 years old throughout the entirety of the pilot project. They had to be living in Lindsay, living in one of the communities for a minimum of at least 12 months or longer. And they had to be low income. So for single folks, you had to be making less than $34,000. And for couples, you had to be making a combined income of less than $48,000. Once folks qualified, single participants were able to receive up to approximately $17,000 per year in basic income payments, minus 50% of any earned income. And that amount was around $24,000 per year for couples. And folks with disabilities were given a supplement of around $500 per month. So the payments officially began in 2017. And before I get too much into my experience on basic income, I guess it's important for me to contrast it by speaking a little bit about life before basic income for myself. Right after high school, I took a job at General Motors. I worked on the line, putting side view mirrors on cars. And after several months of this work, I knew I needed to set myself up for other opportunities. There was constant rumors of coming layoffs. So I applied for university. Did not have much support economically in terms of affording my basic living as well as a tuition, and OSAP also wouldn't cover it. So as I entered university, I was working overnights at General Motors and then going to school during the day for full-time classes. and I was barely keeping up with my schoolwork. I was frequently sick due to lack of sleep and poor eating habits. I was later missing classes because I'd have to pull over to take naps on my way home from work overnight. I had terrible mental health, trouble maintaining friendships and relationships, and I was isolated socially. And then, as I anticipated, I inevitably got laid off from General Motors and couldn't land a job right away. And so in the interim, I drained my bank account and I racked up credit card debt. So then at the time that I applied for basic income, like I was really, really struggling. I was still a student. I managed to find jobs finally, was working 2 part-time jobs just to pull in enough money to get by and pay tuition. And then enters the pilot project, or then I joined the pilot project. So I received $714 a month, with my first payment coming to me in April of 2018. And when I was on basic income, I was finally able to reduce my hours as a full-time student to just 20 to 30 hours, depending on my course load, to be able to better take care of myself. So speaking to some of the pieces Elaine mentioned, the benefits of basic income, I'm hoping they come through in my story now when I explain what my life looked like on basic income. But with the time I was able to recover, not having to work those full times overnights while also being a full-time student, I became civically engaged for the first time in my life. In May, just 1 month after receiving my first payment, I took a role as a campaign manager for my local Liberal candidate in the 2018 provincial elections. It was an unpaid role, but I was working countless hours. I got very deeply involved with my community for the first time. And once that campaign ended, I was able to take on really meaningful work. So I was taking on gigs that, didn't offer much in terms of pay or hours per se, but I was passionate about the work. And in the long run, they helped me grow professionally and personally. And these jobs were stepping stones for me and where I ended up in my career now. So this more meaningful work at a less pay and at times volunteering set me up for success in the long run. And I would argue I was working just as hard as before. My mental health improved, as did my physical health. I ate better. I, renewed my prescription, my eyeglass prescription for the first time in years. I was reconnecting with friends. I paid off my debt. I was financially independent from a significant other for the first time in a long time. My grades improved, and just overall, I was very hopeful for my future. And then it was only 10 months into the pilot program that it was announced that the progressive conservative government, the newly elected government, was canceling the pilot, despite promises that they would not do so. I remember this day distinctly because the announcement came in as I was driving home from a car dealership where I signed a lease on a reliable used vehicle because my beater had officially bit the dust and I was sick of not having reliable access to transportation. I had been so excited for this reliable access to transportation, and then, my heart stopped. I made this financial commitment based on an understanding that the pilot would run for the 3 years it was intended to run for. The Minister of Children and Youth Services at the time, Lisa McLeod, said that the decision was mostly based on cost, and they felt that the program didn't help people become independent contributors to the economy. And she added that, to Jim's points, Doug Ford did not feel that it would move people from welfare to jobs. So I received my last payment, or we received our last payments in March of 2019. While the data and analytics did not happen as they were intended due to the premature cancellation, the Basic Income Canada Network and Ontario Basic Income Network and countless other researchers, including Jo Lee, who is here with us tonight, and I want to give her a shout out because I'm going to use a bunch of her stats right now, but they circulated a survey for recipients to try to gather information before it was lost. So they received a total of about 425 responses. And as expected, the survey demonstrated that basic income improved indicators of well-being, and specifically the indicators that the baseline survey looked for. So for example, 32% of respondents went back to school and upgraded their skills. 50% were able to pay off their debt. 60% improved their housing situation, and 75% said that they were able to make healthier food choices. My favorite part of the report that Jolie produced was some of the quotes we got from participants. So I'm going to read a couple of them to you guys verbatim. So people were saying things like, I didn't skip my medications in order to make them last longer, or I was able to buy my grandchildren a gift, which I had never done before, or I could afford to go to the small grocery store that's closer to me, and I was able to get out from under my payday loans. As soon as the cancellation was announced, people began to organize to have the decision appealed or just to support one another. The Basic Income Canada Network and Ontario Basic Income Network ran a petition to save the pilot almost immediately after it was announced it was coming to an end, and that petition got around 30,000 signatures. There was, in my community, there was a rally of around 100 people in Victoria Park, which doesn't sound like a lot of people, but for Lindsay, Ontario, it was a really great turnout, especially given how short notice it was organized in. Local organizations in Lindsay came together to hold community lunches for recipients. And it gave them a chance to network amongst each other, to grow a support network, discuss the legal actions that we were pursuing, and just seek support from service providers. So on the note of legal action, this is something that is ongoing, and what I consider one of the successes of the organizing. So one of our local lawyers and community leaders, Mike Perry, filed an application to the courthouse in Lindsay asking the court effectively to strike down the government's decision to cancel the basic income pilot. This court dismissed the application. They found that it was purely political, and courts could not or should not decide on the matter. But Mike Perry also filed a civil lawsuit for damages. So this class action is still actually ongoing. The court decided not to certify it as a class, which means they decided not to combine all 4,000 participants into one lawsuit. But that decision is still under appeal. And recently, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association joined the lawsuits as advocates on the issue. So that is promising. Yep. And another success of organizing was that more than $15,000 was raised on GoFundMe to help finance the lawsuit, although the lawyers mostly did this pro bono. So those were some of the successes to organizing. I find what's been very interesting have been the challenges to organizing. For myself, one of the largest barriers to my participation in organizing and advocating for basic income has actually been stigma. Regardless of how positive the impact basic income was on my life, I didn't often share the fact that I was a recipient of basic income with very many people because I was afraid of what they might think of me or say about it. Within my community, there was expressed animosity towards participants of the pilot. For the most part, community members that opposed it, would say things like they didn't support giving lazy people free money and would criticize anyone they knew on the pilot for buying things like Tim Hortons, regardless of how they spent the majority of their money. Knowing that I don't have a lot of time left, I'm going to skip over some of the other challenges to organizing that we found, but welcome questions about it later. But generally speaking, that's a summary of what happened with the basic income pilot here in Ontario, specifically in Lindsay, in my community. So I'm very, very grateful for all the community leaders who have been continuing to push for UBI. They always maintain a positive attitude in their advocacy, and I find it very admirable. And whenever we get caught up on challenges to organizing, they keep pointing to the successes. So going forward for the rest of the evening, I hope that what I can offer tonight's conversation is a place to ground or humanize the political discussion. And in particular, I hope that hearing my story and what I was able to share for other community members helps counter assumptions made about universal basic income and the people receiving it.
Jessica, before you go, I'm being lobbied here that you be given an extra few minutes to talk about the organizing challenges and your own personal experiences with the organizing challenges. And so if you could take an extra three minutes or so, that would be really great.
Okay. Yeah, okay, so to speak to a couple other challenges, especially challenges that I face, or I still am facing currently, despite speaking to you about it right now, is poverty of time. So once universal basic income payments came to an end, I was scrambling, or even before they ended, I was scrambling, trying to make sure I could make ends meet. So reverted back to working full-time, being a student full-time. Actually ended up increasing the amount I was working to, 60 hours a week on average, still trying to finish school. So I was spending so much time working. I knew that people like Jolie and others in my community were doing really great organizing work, but I simply didn't have the energy left over to participate in advocacy. And it wasn't until recent years when I now work in food insecurity as well. And it wasn't until I got a role in a food security-based organization that I was able to take back time that I needed to use my voice and advocate for basic income. And then sort of the last challenge that I noted, that's a personal challenge, but I know is shared, is a lack of confidence both in myself and in the system or in the government to even bother speaking up. After the cancellation, a lot of participants lost confidence in the government to support them, especially given that the Ford government had promised not to cancel the program. So many folks didn't see the point in sharing their story. They didn't think that speaking up would make a difference. And folks were shocked, they were depressed, they were scared, they didn't have energy left in them to challenge the cancellation. And most folks, like I know, I kind of went into survival mode. I just had to go back to just focusing on how I could take care of myself and get through the day. And then in terms of advocacy and activism as a whole, like you do have to have a certain degree of confidence in yourself to be able to speak up. And like I'm a relatively well-educated and somewhat well-spoken individual, but it's like it's a very intimidating space to enter, like public discourse, especially politics, because there's a lot of personal attacks that are made instead of aiming criticism at politics. So even though I know rationally that my lived experience and that my story is valid and it's valuable, I do feel like I need to be a policy expert in order to have any weight or be able to justify taking up space in public discourse around basic income. And if I feel like that, as someone who has had the chance to study at Trent, and I come from, like, relative to other folks, a place of privilege, I would reckon. Folks that haven't even had those opportunities, how did they know how to take up space? Like it's really hard to break into that space. But that's essentially all I have to say. I mean, I'll welcome more and more questions about challenges, but that's what I had prepared.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Jessica. We're getting some questions, and first one I'm going to raise. It doesn't surprise me, coming from Andy Hansen, who's also a Trent graduate. Where is the labor movement on UBI? Anybody can take that. If nobody knows, that speaks for itself. But if you have any knowledge of that, I'd be curious to hear it. Yeah, Elaine?
It's actually kind of mixed. I think there was a lot of hesitation initially in labor, in the labor movement among unions. But we're seeing more and more unions coming out in support of basic income. In other countries, in the UK, for example, and in Europe, the labor movement is a strong part of the basic income movement, but we're still working on them here. There is some opposition from the left. One of the main critiques is that seems to be, there's often kind of a straw dog kind of set up that, we could have one or the other. We could have basic income or we could have services. I don't think that's true. There's also a critique that basic income would subsidize low wage employers, which I never really understood until I figured out what was going on in the US. And there, a lot of the municipal pilots that are happening are $300, $400, $500 a month, not enough to live on. And they are subsidizing low wage employers, but that's not the kind of basic income we're advocating here in Canada.
Okay, anybody else like to contribute to that? I have more questions, but okay. I have one here. How would it, just hang on 1 second, please. How would it affect women's unpaid work, care work? And I was wondering how UBI has affected families and mothers' unpaid care work in the pilot project.
Well, I know that many people said that basic income allowed them to be better parents because they weren't so stressed and they didn't have to say no to their kids all the time. In the book, we feature the story of Jody Dean, who was part of the time was a single mom with a kid with she had 3 children. She has 3 children, 1 child with very complex medical needs. And it allowed her to take much better care of her daughter. I don't mean that in an emotional way, but materially, like things like when she would have difficult physio treatments, she could take her daughter for a treat afterward, for example. So just very simple things that many of us take for granted that we could do with our kids, that parents who live in poverty just can't do that. And I'm not sure if that really answered the question that the person was asking, but I guess one of the primary arguments in support of basic income is that it allows people the freedom to make the best choices for themselves and their families. So they have the security and that freedom to make the choice that makes the most sense for them in their situation.
Yeah, if I could add to this, David.
Sure.
From an historical perspective, the one highly successful basic income program we have is the Guaranteed Income Supplement for seniors. And that was brought in the 1960s, again, by a committee that David Kroll was part of. The Senate Committee on Aging was recommending it. Principally focused, above all, on older widowed women who had grown up in the Depression, worked in the World War II, and then exited the economy, looked after their husbands, looked after their parents, and had no pension for themselves. So the poverty of single widowed women in their 60s and 70s and 80s was the most important argument for a guaranteed income supplement to recognize the contributions of their unpaid labor for generations. And I think that's a parallel that applies to how it would compensate the unpaid care work of women today.
Yeah. Here's a question. If you're a policy analyst, a politician with the relevant ministry at Queen's Park, and we know who that is or what that is, and you had the power, how would you design a UBI? What would your conception be of an ideal UBI?
If I can jump in here.
Yes.
Because this is something that I struggle with as someone who doesn't have a full understanding per se, like of policy. So I actually kind of want to almost pose my answer in a way as a question for Elaine to help me understand better. But you know, maybe being young and naive, I assume that the best model for,
I don't think you're so naive, but
for universal basic income is a truly universal model, right? So I'm looking for paid to everyone unconditionally. And for me, a lot of my thoughts around that come from the stigma piece that I face in my own community. You know, if everyone's receiving it, then there is no folks that are just takers. It's a right to all. And on a similar note, like in order to get community buy-in, I felt like universal would increase community buy-in, and that, you know, once again, there's not just some folks that they perceive as taking while others are paying for footing the bill. So could you maybe in a way can we change this and you help me understand why the universal model might not be as desirable as the negative income tax model?
Yeah, I have to say, Jessica, when I first 8 years ago, when I first started doing this work, I was completely with you. I also, I suppose being a child of the 20th century, really strongly believed in universality and the kind of cohesion that that can bring. And I think in an ideal world, I would still support a universal model. I guess I've been convinced over the years, or maybe worn down, that that it just is at this moment in time, at least, that a targeted model, it would be a much easier sell, because the upfront cost of a truly universal model is like, I forget, it's an incredible percentage of our GDP. It's huge. And I guess the other problem, at least in this historical moment, as we know that especially very wealthy people have lots of ways of avoiding taxes. So while ideally, you would get it back in the tax system, there could be ways of hiding it. So I guess, we need progressive tax reform. And that if we were to engage in that exercise, we could just make it so that the people on the lower half get money back from the government, and the people in the top half, like me, would be paying a much fairer share, and there would need to be a little work done in the middle to make sure that nobody's worse off. But I think, philosophically, I think we could probably all agree that universal would be better. Practically, at least at this moment in time, I just don't think we could sell it. So, and then David, sorry, Jessica, also, I think, we have the Ontario pilot as a model that we can start with. Hugh Siegel wrote a very detailed report about how to design it. I think there's some things that could have been improved on. For example, the pilot was set at 75% of the poverty line. It's kind of astonishing to me, the incredible difference it made in people's lives, even at 75% of the poverty line. We're not even talking at the poverty line. It was about double what people were getting on social assistance, even at that level. The other problem, I think, with the Ontario pilot is that it was, we need a basic income that goes specifically to individuals in the household. And that's really important for women if they're trying to leave situations of abuse. And I noted in the chat that basic income is one of the key recommendations of the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls report, because poverty is one of the major reasons why Indigenous women and girls go missing, because they're desperate to flee abuse and poverty. So they get into terrible situations to make money. Anyway, and Jessica, I just want to say, I really appreciate your bravery in speaking out, and you're very articulate, and I hope we'll hear lots more from you.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Another question. Does UBI level the playing field between the haves and the have-nots?
I think it's not.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I think it's not a fix-all solution, but it certainly helps. If I reflect back on, it's really tricky. I want to reflect back on the experience of the pilot, but I'm reflecting back on a pilot that never even got its chance. We don't have the data we needed to tell you that exactly, but what we did get would say yes, just looking at even some of the stats I was able to share earlier. And especially when I reflect back on my experience post-cancellation, that's when I was really woken up to the income inequality in my community, and how basic income really did set people up for success if it had run for the long term. for example, I was working in a food bank. I ran a food bank at the time when it ended. And as soon as it was canceled, I saw a 33% increase to the amount of people coming to my food bank, like immediately, which went to show that, you know, those folks they were able to take care of themselves with that support. So like, I'm not answering it fully, but nonetheless, not a full solution, but it helps.
Good.
Yeah,
Anybody else? That's a big question. Anybody else?
I think it would have a huge impact in terms of the people who have good, well-paying jobs and people who are caught in the precarious economy, the gig economy of having to combine 2, 3 different jobs with no benefits and no paid leave. I mean, I think we're even seeing that right now with how the impact of the CERB benefit on that situation. So it's not going to have a major impact on necessarily reducing inequality when it changes other changes to the tax system, but just the inequality of income in terms of the type of employment stability one has, it would be a major supplement to people's income.
Yeah. Okay. I got a comment and a question from one person who has an insight, I suppose, on policy development at the federal and the provincial level, and refer to this file as a zombie file, that it's just sort of sitting there, right? And so the question he has with that, and it's always interesting to hear from the inside. The question that was raised with that was, how do we enliven the file? How do we breathe some life into it so that it that something can occur? All 3 of you.
I love the idea of basic income as a zombie that's haunting the halls of our
right.
legislatures. I mean, I think, the Ontario government, the previous government, the Liberal government, did something to enliven the zombie. They decided to run a pilot. I think if the PEI project goes ahead, that will really also enliven the discussion, and much like Medicare, will provide a fantastic example of how it could roll out provincially. Someone in the chat said something about preaching to the choir, which unfortunately I think a lot of these webinars do. But if people can take this out into their communities and talk with people about basic income, maybe put a sign on your lawn or just raise it. That will also help enliven it. We're also working, to have conversations with MPs and MPPs. And I think having brave people like Jessica who actually tell their stories, those stories really also enliven the conversation about basic income. I mean, I guess in some ways it's a good thing that it's a zombie. I think that's partly why we got the pilot in Ontario, because, the Premier Kathleen Wynne's senior policy aide, he knew about basic income and he was just waiting for an opportunity, I think, to pick it up and run with it. So I guess it's just the alignment of the stars that allows governments to take the zombie and inject new life into it. Maybe Jim has more perspective on this from a historical perspective.
Yeah, a couple of things I'd say to that, Elaine. And first of all, the only significant success we've had in Ontario and Canada in the last decade in terms of poverty reduction has been the child benefit, giving children, families with children, tax payment or monthly stipend of $1,100 per child. It's been a major contribution to family income, and that is a form of, in a sense, a guaranteed, needs-based but guaranteed income for families with children. We've got a similar success story with seniors since 1967 with the guaranteed income supplement. So I think we just have to reframe it as it's not just a zombie because a pilot project was canceled. We've got 2 now really powerful working programs that have had major impact on reducing child poverty and seniors poverty. And it's just a question of extending that model into the issues surrounding working poor people who cannot find steady enough work or well enough paid work to put together an income that will bring them up to a poverty line market basket standard of living. And the other point I think is the grandfathering effect too. It will benefit children in the future if their parents have a stable income now, both in terms of health, so mental health, physical health, self-confidence, housing, obviously in terms of runaway housing shelter costs right now. So many different ways. So I just think we have to keep making those points.
Okay. Got a question here about women who are have to leave their homes because of domestic violence and usually become homeless. 2 out of 5 was pointed out in the chat. Would UBI be helpful in that context?
Well, I think yes, and we need more than, I mean, basic income is necessary but insufficient. You know, it's critical, I think, for a revitalized social safety net, but housing right now is you know, we definitely need better housing policy that ensures affordable housing for people. So, you know, it's not, basic income is not a silver bullet, and it's not the be all and the end all. It's just the beginning.
Yeah. Anybody else? Or I got a question here from someone who wants to talk about how we sell this idea on the left itself. As you know, as some of you might know, there's some criticism coming from left sources, John Clark, Dennis Raphael, etc. How does that take place? If UBI is so obviously a program that will lift the boats that need to be lifted, at least that's what it seems to me. What's the issue here? What's the selling here that needs to be done?
Well, I think the support for basic income has grown so strong that, in fact, John Clark has even recently come out in, I mean, wouldn't say coming out in support might be a little too strong, but he's not arguing against it in the same way that he was. So I think they're, the left critics maybe are being left behind in the dust.
I think you'd also come back to the failure of the welfare system itself. I mean, what's the alternative? This model we've been working on for the last half century has consistently failed to bring people out of poverty, has consistently failed to protect people's dignity and self-esteem and self-respect, has consistently trapped generations of people in poverty. And I think we have to contrast what possibilities are with basic income. Again, the CERB model is an interesting example of how quickly something can be rolled out and make a major difference in people's lives simply through the tax system in ways that's non-stigmatizing, non-bureaucratic, and non-complicated, and accomplish the task right now. And I think, you know, the statistics we saw, I was quoting on the food bank usage explosions in Toronto, that's a crisis. It's you know, it's not something that we can accept. And the other models haven't worked.
Yeah, and I would say along with the food crisis, there's a major housing crisis in this country. I mean, the homeless population in Kingston has exploded, and I think it's the same right across the country. Sorry, I lost what I was going to say. Oh, in Hamilton, which was one of the other sites for the pilot, some of the folks at McMaster, at Labor Studies in McMaster, did, again, not the kind of rigorous evaluation that we would have seen if the pilot had been allowed to run, but their survey showed that people who were working 2-3 jobs actually benefited more from the pilot than people on social assistance. So having the security of that income floor allowed them to be less stressed and to be healthier, and again, to make better choices about their lives. So I think that's one of the really important things about basic income, is that it's not just about people on social assistance or people that, you know, we think of as the poor, in kind of older terms. It's about the 25-year-old maybe sitting in their parents' basement who is working in the gig economy and can't afford to get out of their parents' house. It's about supporting people to do, start their own businesses and maybe do environmental work. And so the base for basic income, the numbers of people it would help and support is much bigger than that kind of narrower category that we're used to thinking about. And someone asked about the stigma in Dauphin. In fact, many more people applied for the guaranteed annual income in Dauphin because there was no stigma. And I think we would see the same with basic income, that many more people would be eligible and would receive it than would ever go on social assistance.
Jim, you want to?
I think it has to go in tandem too with what we've already been doing, which is increasing the minimum wage. So you have to make work much more rewarding for everyone through a higher minimum wage that it sets people's income above the poverty line, and that can make it much more feasible for a basic income to make up the difference when it doesn't, when people lose work.
Isn't much of the talk or the policy around the UBI around the anticipation of the fear that because of artificial intelligence and robotics and globalization and other forces like that are going to create huge amounts of unemployment and in the not too distant future, and there's a sense of having to deal with that and avoid some of the social consequences that might come out of that?
Yes.
Well put.
Jolie has asked if she could speak for a minute.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Jolie Scheidler, and I've worked with Jess for so long. She's the most amazing young lady ever. She's truly going to be a superstar. But I just want to say, in terms of what I found within my own research, is a hierarchy developed similar to what Foucault looks at. And so we saw that the working poor were viewed as the most worthwhile receiving that. So if you did work even a little bit, you were okay. The second level of hierarchy was ODSP. So, they have disabilities, we understand, even though they're very much underpaid. Different discussion. And then OW people, they thought, oh, well, those people are not working. Why should they get the money? And then at the bottom of the hierarchy was those that they viewed as using the money for drinking, drugs, unproductive activities in the community. But I think our police chief, our retired police chief in Lindsay, Ontario, saw this in terms of a cathedral thinking, which is the most beautiful depiction of the concept moving forward. Because when we built cathedrals as a society, we knew it wasn't going to be completed in our lifetime. Like, there's generational impacts when we talk about poverty. I mean, in terms of colonization, there is so much unlearning that has to be done to even get to the point. So we can't judge this particular cycle moving forward in our vision. We're looking for cathedral thinking, long-term strategy, that after a few generations, we can actually heal as a society. Once people are restabilized, rebalanced, can actually take a breath, you actually lose IQ points, depending on the time of the month, when you're in poverty of any type, working or not. When you get that paycheck, boom, by the end, 2 days before you get your next payment, your thinking is definitely not as clear. So in terms of cathedral thinking, this is generations looking forward. So we can't look for immediate results, although I think Elaine and I and Sheila all found that there was incredible agency within that short amount of time. Even within 4 months, people taking action. This is important. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. And if anybody wants to contact me, Jess has all my information.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna take one final question, and then I'm gonna ask the 3 speakers if they want to wrap this up and just pull it all together in some kind of a concluding wrap-up kind of way. There's a question about that and I think you've sort of addressed this a bit, but a little bit more specifically though, that some of the stigma is that people going on UBI are going to squander the money and drugs and alcohol and all that, and why should the Ontario or the Canadian taxpayer subsidize that? So if you want to just field that, and then we'll make that the final question.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. This just drives me crazy. It's a classic kind of objection. And what the research shows over and 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 over is that just the opposite, actually, that when people have that kind of stability, when they have they can think, as Jolie was saying, they can breathe and they can think, and they can actually plan for the future. In fact, the research shows that people stop drinking so much, they quit cigarettes, they make plans for their future, and they make decisions for them to improve their own and their children's lives. And so, back to Jolie's, cathedral thinking, this is, in the longer term, we could heal so much of the trauma that people are carrying. I would argue, this division between the so-called deserving and the undeserving poor, I bet that if we actually measured it, probably everybody who's on OW is carrying trauma and could probably qualify for ODSP if the criteria weren't so rigid and strict. And I would think, it will take a few generations, but we can heal a lot of that trauma. And I guess one of the other objections, especially coming from labor, is that, well, all the bureaucrats who administer these systems will be out of work. Well, take those civil servants who probably wanted to go into social work thinking they could help people, not police them. Take them and give them jobs that are meaningful, supporting people to improve their lives, whether that's for addictions or mental health or whatever. There's lots and lots of work to be done.
I go back to another point too, Elaine. Again, that statistic, in 2008, only 30% of the jobless were able to collect employment insurance, even though everyone, part-time people, were paying into it. The conditions are so ridiculous, they can't collect to a system they're paying into. And for much of the early decade of the 21st century, those contributions were paying down the federal surplus, federal debt.
Yeah.
So it's money that's being misused, taken away from its supposed recipients, the unemployed, the jobless, used for other people's purposes to lower taxes for everyone else. So there's a different way of looking at who's robbing the system or who's diverting money from where it's most needed than just people abusing the UBI. They don't.
Okay, I'm going to ask each of you to take a minute or two just to wrap up, some final thoughts, revelations, whatever. Want to go first in the same order, Elaine?
Well, I would just like to thank everyone for coming and for your interest, and thank you, yes, to everyone who was involved in putting this on. I can talk about this for hours, and I love to talk about it. Maybe just as a takeaway, if everybody here could talk to 2 people or 3 people that aren't in the choir about basic income. And remember, there's an election coming up, and remember who killed the pilot.
Yes. I think his first name is Doug, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and Lisa McLeod too.
Yes.
I've reserved special places in hell for them.
Yeah. Jim?
I think we just have to come back to the existing model is not working. It's not working for people who can't find work. It's not working for people who are trying to combine 3 or 4 different jobs. It's not working in terms of developing income security for stable housing and food and planning for a career. So if we've tried so many times to reform welfare and all we've done is make it worse. So I think it's time to move to a different model, and based on ones that do work for seniors and for children.
Thank you. Jessica, last word.
I guess first I just want to thank everyone for being so kind in the comments. I really appreciated that. Was very nervous coming into today. I think my parting words will actually be some wisdom that David bestowed upon me a couple of days ago. We were talking about the successes or challenges in organizing, and I was like pretty well arguing that the organizing had not been successful, because to me successful looks like a universal basic income being in place. That's like what I assume is the success, since that's the end goal. But you can help me rephrase this if I'm doing it wrong, David, but essentially your point to me was that the success is in organizing itself, and that we need to embrace that as the success, and just stay consistent. And that would be what I'd pass on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm going to leave the final words to Momin.
Thanks, David. Thank you, first of all, to everybody who attended and for the great questions and the kind of stimulating discussion that provoked. And I want to say a particular thank you to David Rappaport, who organized this panel, brought the idea to the department, explained how it would run, and has, I think, brought us some 3 really interesting speakers. Thanks again to Otonabee College for supporting us. And of course, most of all, thank you to Jim and to Elaine for their insights and their wisdom. But most of all, I really want to say thank you to Jess, because you've said it's been a bit nerve-wracking, but I think, you know, people really enjoyed your contribution, and it's really important for us to hear the lived experience of these issues, right? Like that does make it real for people. And I think I was really struck when you talked about the stigma kind of associated with it, and you know, that's those are the kinds of issues that we need to confront and say, no, this isn't what this is about. This is about dignity, and it's about something that we all will benefit from, whether we're getting the UBI or not. But it's best for this, you know, better for society. So thank you, Jess. Really appreciate you coming and talking, and thanks again to Jim and Elaine. And we'll say good night there, and thank you again for everyone for the questions and for joining.
And thank you, Momin. And just a final reminder, this is going to be available on YouTube, the Trent University Otonabee College YouTube channel, and we're going to notify you how to access that. And thanks for everybody for coming, and have a good night.